What's good, fam? Welcome back to the zone. Today we are going to continue on with our team spotlights, and we're going to focus on the Boston Celtics. Just as we did in the past couple of episodes, we're going to focus on the players that have a 70 overall or above. If you did miss any of those previous episodes where we highlighted why I'm focusing on the 70 overall players, feel free to check out the videos in the links below. But the idea here is, one, I don't want our videos to be super long unless absolutely necessary. And two, I want to highlight the key players on these teams that will in fact be playing and will in fact have an impact on the standings for the specific team. Because a lot of the times 2K has a bias based on the ratings. So if there were some unfortunate souls that are under 70, odds are they probably won't get any play time unless there is a need at a certain position. So going back to the Mavs video where we discussed Rod McGee, he's a 68 overall, but he was the only player on the team that was a center. So as a result, he got some play time. And so there are a few teams within the league that have that same situation where they need a shooting guard, or they need a center, or they need a power forward. And because that the only player on the team that is that role is a 60, or well, definitely not a 60, but a higher 60, let's say 68 or 69, usually they get placed in the starting lineup if that's what the team needs. But oftentimes anybody else, if there's another two players at the same position, those people will be on the reserves or on the bench and just not get any minutes. So that's why I'm focusing on those players that have a 70 overall or above, unless they're unique people like Rod McGee that are under 70, but they may be a 70 if they were in a different position or whatever the case may be. Now, that's being said, let's talk about Michael Terry. Now, Michael Terry is based off of the 90 to 91 Lakers version of Magic Johnson. So that version of Magic Johnson in 2K is a point guard, shooting guard, had a 93 overall, was 6'9", 220, and the age of 31 with 23 badges. So off G, you can see that there's some slight differences between the two players. First and foremost, Michael is a 90 overall compared to Magic's 93. He's going to be 3 inches shorter and also 15 pounds lighter at 205 and drastically younger. So pretty much the embodiment of Magic in his prime, but at a younger age. Michael himself has 28 badges, as you can see, which is 3 less than Magic, but overall he is the highest overall player in this league. And so that means I personally have high expectations of Michael. Now, granted, of the games that I've watched, it's been a bit of a mixed bag. There's some games where he takes a back seat, and there's some games where he really is aggressive and takes over the offense. And so I'm hoping that what I saw was a bit of a fluke, but I could be very wrong. Now, when it comes to the attributes that were changed based off of the randomizer, 2 of the attributes that were changed were offense related, 2 were defense related, 1 was mental, and of course the final piece is going to be the potential. Now, for the offensive rebound attribute, he actually got an upgrade of 3 points, bringing it from a 46 to a 49. From a standing dunk perspective, he also got upgraded again, taking it from a 25 to a 46. From a block perspective, that also got a huge bump of 40 points, bringing his block attribute from a 32 to a 72. And then his shot contest went down by 4 points from 98 to 94. Shouldn't be that big of a deal. He should be able to stay in front of his matchup and get in their face to not block some shots, but at least disrupt some shots. And then his pick and roll defense IQ got downgraded a lot by 29 points from a 95 to a 66. Now, when it comes to the potential, as mentioned in if not the last vid, the one prior to it where we highlighted the Pelicans, the randomizer downgraded Michael's potential from a 98 down to a 66, which was 32 points. But being that Michael's overall is so high, 2K pretty much overwrote the 66 attribute that was identified by the randomizer, and in this case it bumped it up to, I believe, a 91. Yeah. And so just to give Michael a little bit of room to grow, mainly because he's still young, so to just cap him at that, plus his peak start and peak end is a specific range, which has an impact on things as well. So if I look here, it looks like his peak is going to start in 3 years and is going to end when he's 31. So the 2K, I guess, application or software, whatever we want to call it, the 2K game, decided to pretty much upgrade the potential that I had at 66 and boost it up to a 91 just to give Michael some room to grow. And so as I mentioned before, he's the highest overall player in this entire league. So there's a lot of expectation on my part to see what Michael can do, see if he can actually lead the league in a few categories. Whether or not he'll get MVP is another thing to see, but I definitely expect him to see in the All-Star game, considering how high his overall is. Now next up, we have Austin Carney. And so Austin is also a special player on this team. You'll see that he has an overall of 85, and that is mainly driven by the fact that he is based off of Klay Thompson. So I was pretty hyped about this when this happened, but this version of Klay is the 20 to 21 Warriors version of Klay. Now granted, I think last year he was out with a knee injury, so as a result we didn't get to see him play, but this build of Klay had an 89 overall shooting guard, two-way, three-level scorer, which is the same thing that you see at Austin as. And from a height perspective, same height, oddly enough, but the weight is different. Austin is a little bit lighter, and whereas Klay is 30, Austin is 20. So just like with Michael, think about folks in their prime, but now in a younger body. Now granted, given the injuries, Klay may not be considered in his prime depending on who you speak to, but nonetheless, Klay is still a threat regardless of how you look at it. Now, when it comes to Austin's badges, and let me not even talk about badges, when it comes to his attributes, the randomizer downgraded 5 out of the 6 badges. So what was selected was the post hook. That was downgraded by 4 points from 35 down to a 31. Post moves got downgraded a lot by 37 points, almost half, going from 74 down to 37. His pass IQ, which is sad to see, got bumped down as well from 80 down to a 25. So that was the biggest loss that he took by 55 points. From a blocking perspective, he actually got better in his ability to block, jumping from a 55 to a 75. And then his vert got dropped down from a 67 to a 45. Now, from a potential standpoint, that was also reduced from a 90 to a 79. But as I mentioned before, if the overall is just at a certain level, 2K overwrote the potential that I established. So in this case, it applied to 85 to match his overall. And so going back to the badges, Klay has 34 badges as of May when I built Austin. And in this case, Austin qualified for 29 badges. So he's off by 5. Now, when it comes to his tendencies, his shot close is a 79. This is what was changed by the randomizer, by the way. His shot close right is a 75. Shot mid left is a 56. The contested jumper mid-range is a 50, and a step back jumper mid-range is a 59. Now, my thoughts on Austin is very similar to Michael in that considering the players that were selected for the build, I have high expectations. As you can see, he is the number 2 person on the team from an overall perspective. His shooting is off the charts, so I would expect him to be able to contribute a lot on offense. And there are times where it's just night and day. I really can't explain it. I don't know if it's because of the system that he's in, or maybe it's because he's not identified as either a primary or secondary scorer for the team. But there's some games where I see him just not make any shots whatsoever, nor take any shots. And there are some games where he's just lighting things up from all angles on the field. And so I'm curious to see how things pan out during the season. I definitely want to test him out, like on a matchup. I want to see Raphael go against him, see how Raphael is able to perform from a defensive perspective, and to see if Austin is going to be as deadly as Clay is in 2K. Now next up, we have Griffin Carl. And so every time I say Griffin Carl's name, I automatically think of Peter Griffin. I guess that's a bad habit, and for a long time I was calling him Carl Griffin, so there's that. But you'll see that he is a slashing playmaker. Griffin is our third highest overall player on this team. He's a power forward, small forward, as a secondary, which is strange considering that he's 6'10". But he is going to be based off of Kyle Anderson from the 2021 Grizzlies, who's also a power forward, small forward build in 2K, and also a slashing playmaker. Now, the difference between the two is that, oddly enough, they're both the same age, so that's not necessarily a difference, but Griffin is an inch taller, he is 12 pounds heavier, but he also qualified for 25 more badges than Kyle actually has in this version of 2K. Now, when it comes to next gen or even current gen at 2K22, that might be different, but this is what I'm dealing with at the moment. Now, from a attribute perspective, the randomizer was not friendly to Griffin at all. Only 1 out of the 6 attributes was improved upon, which was the post hook. So that got bumped up by 44 points from a 45 to 89, but his free throw, strength, defensive consistency, offensive rebound, even his potential was dropped by a minimum of 5 points, but at a maximum of 17 points. So it's not as egregious compared to some of the downgrades that we just witnessed for Austin, but it still has an impact nonetheless. Now, when it comes to Griffin's play, I would call him a role player. I don't necessarily see him being super assertive on the court. I will say that he definitely can contribute. He definitely helps out on the defensive side. But when it comes to scoring, I don't see much unless there's a fast break and he's already in the paint. But there's probably more to see when it comes to Griffin. I don't have as high expectations for him as I do with Austin and Michael, but there's definitely more to be seen when it comes to Griffin, especially if this is the right system for him. But yeah, that's all I have to say about Griffin for now. Now, next up, we have Alberto Medina. So Alberto is based off of a 2K base, and that base was a power forward, small forward. The height was 6'9", and the weight was 217. Now, unfortunately, I didn't track what the build was or the number of badges, but I'm going to assume the number of badges was 0. But as you can see here, Alberto is one of the taller players in this league at 7'1", also a little beefy, at 266 from a weight perspective, and he's 29. He's flagged as having 6 years worth of experience within the league. And from an attribute perspective, I didn't actually track the number changes, but from what I have in my notes, it says that pretty much the randomizer had a negative effect for the offensive attributes that were selected, was neutral towards the defensive attributes that were selected, and positive for the overall potential. So you'll see that he qualifies for 10 badges. He's a 76 overall, and he's the 4th highest overall on this team. Now, when we talk about the attributes specifically, his post hook was changed to a 48, his defensive rebound was changed to a 75, block as well as steal was changed to a 64, his vert is an 88, and his potential is a 92. And so what you can see from the shooting is that he is a little bit above average, especially for his position. So he could definitely score from the perimeter. But what I've seen is that he has to be wide open. If he's contested, odds are he'll probably brick it. But he can shoot if given the opportunity and given the right conditions to do so. From a defensive perspective, I can't say anything too negative. He definitely gets boards. I have seen that. On the offensive boards, not so much, but definitely defensive boards. I haven't seen him block, but he definitely gets in the way. I would say that much. I don't have expectations of Alberto. I'm definitely pleased when he does take initiative and gets involved in the game, but I don't see it that often. Usually I do see other folks get involved, probably more than they should, but he isn't one of them. He could definitely get more involved if the system fits and if the play fits for him as well. Now, next up, we have Gustavo Vega. Now, Gustavo, as you can see, is a 75 overall. He's considered a playmaking force, so he definitely comes off of the bench, third string if necessary, compared to Griffin Carl and Alberto Medina. So he's a pure power forward compared to the other two that could fill in different slots. But he's 6'6", 232, age 26. And I think I mentioned he already has 11 badges, but if I didn't, you can see that on the screen. But Gustavo is actually based off of Manu Ginobili, one of the stars of his time. And so the build that we're using for Gustavo is the Manu from the 13-14 Spurs. And so Manu was a shooting guard, small forward. This build was 35, so yet again, another older player now being placed into a younger body. Gustavo's the same height, oddly enough, but he weighs a little bit more. And Manu had 12 badges compared to Gustavo's 11. Now, from an attribute perspective, like the others, all of the attributes were downgraded with the exception of one, and that's because the change that was identified to be made was what he currently had as the attribute, so there was no change, in short. But from a shooting perspective, his close shot got obliterated by 50 points, down from a 78 to a 28. His perimeter defense down from a 70 to 29, so that's down by 41 points. Speed hit by 55 points as well, down from an 80 to a 25. Hustle is the attribute that went unchanged, so that stayed at 86. His offensive consistency went down by 47 points from 90 to 43, and then his potential went down from a 90 to a 65. But let me see if that actually changed. Yeah, so 2K bumped that up to 75, considering the other changes. Now, despite the fact that all of these attributes that I highlighted were downgraded, one, I will say that Gustavo, like Duncan Webb, is definitely very expressive on the court, as well as off the court. When he's sitting on the bench, if he sees a play he doesn't like, you will definitely see his reaction, which I thought was very interesting from a personality perspective. But two, what I do find is that he does like to take a lot of takes a lot of threes off of screens, and he tends to make them. And he also tends to make contested three-point shots, which I found very interesting. And even now, looking at his attribute, is a 73. And so from a point perspective, he is not going to get high double-digit points. You'll be lucky if he gets up to 12, but he can contribute. And so especially since he's coming off of the bench, that's definitely helpful for the depth needed at the team. But considering that he is, let me just double back. I think his overall is a 75. That means the Celtics does have a lot of room to improve from a depth perspective, considering that he is the 5th highest overall on the team, and he's not able to shoot as well as many others. And then from a defensive perspective, as you know, with the perimeter defense being as poor as it is, coupled with the fact that his interior defense is a 45, don't expect him to help as much from a defensive perspective, but at least he can contribute with getting some points. But defense is definitely something this team will need. Now, next up, we have Fidel Rivera. So Fidel is actually a player that was included in the draft class that I used in my first My League. So he's one of the players that I changed his face, but I didn't change anything else that 2K assigned him. So you'll see that he has 0 badges, he's a slasher, has a 73 overall, and he's going to play the 3 slot, and that's his only position that he'll play. So from an attribute perspective, let's take a deeper dive. Since I didn't create Fidel, the only thing I did was change his face, because it looked a bit wild. But you can see that from an offensive perspective, in some cases, he's either average or below average, with the exception of his close shot, and that's where he does tend to shoot often. If he gets to the line, he's pretty decent when it comes to shooting free throws. But for the most part, a lot of his attributes are I definitely don't see him do much on defense. He definitely does get steals from time to time. And I would say, I can't say he's a role player per se, but he definitely contributes from time to time if the conditions are right. And so, which explains why he was the 27th pick overall. He was pretty much close to being a second rounder, but considering the folks that were in that draft class, which is probably why he went higher. And so from a potential perspective, he has an 82, so there's a lot of room for him to grow and progress, and he'll get better over time. But in the beginning, the first season might be a little bit rough for the Celtics. And so we'll see how things go. Now, next up, we have Jason Caffey. Now, Jason is the final player that I created for this team. So I will admit that he kind of threw a wrench in the overall chemistry that the team had prior to, which might be associated with why my comments with Fidel as well as Gustavo were what they were. But Jason is based off of a 2K base. And you'll see that he is a 73 overall. He qualified for 5 badges, and so he's considered a perimeter lockdown. Now, considering that he's the last player I created, I actually have some notes about him. Now, his original position was point guard, shooting guard, but now he is a small forward. From a height perspective, he grew an inch. From a weight perspective, he gained 1 pound. Now, from a attribute perspective, his post hook was increased by 5 points. So it went up to a 37. His post moves was augmented a lot by 37 points from 36 to a 73. His pass accuracy increased from a 61 up to an 83. His steal got downgraded a lot by 69 points from a 95 down to a 26. So I could only imagine if that attribute stayed the same, how much of a defensive pest Caffey would have been. And then his pick and roll defense IQ was downgraded from an 86 to a 68. And then unfortunately, his potential was downgraded from a 74 to a 61. Now, I just want to see if 2K changed the potential again, and it did. It upgraded that to a 73 to match his overall. So, from what I've seen thus far, on the offensive side, he doesn't do much. But on defensive, I can say that he does get in the way of his matchup. They don't necessarily easily score on him, but I only have like at most 2 games, so anything I say right now might be worthless come the season. So this is somebody I definitely have my eye on. He's one of the 15 that I had to create to wrap up the roster, and so we'll see how things go. So next up, we have Frankie Lane. And so Frankie is based off of a 2K base, and he was one of the players that I created back in April when I first got started. So I believe he and Brandon Moncrief are 2 players that were part of the original that I created around the time that I created Clarence Booker, who I have a soft spot for. And so with Frankie, I don't have much details other than what I have for the attributes that were changed, in addition to the fact that I just wrote that his offensive attributes the changes were neutral, the changes were positive for his defensive attributes, positive for his athletic attributes, and then neutral towards his potential. But as you can see, he's a 72 overall, and he didn't qualify for any badges, so that should say a lot. But nonetheless, he's 6'11", 234 pounds, small forward, plays at the small forward position, and the attributes that were selected were his post fade, that was actually reduced, I can tell you that much, to a 25. His offensive rebound probably got augmented to where it is now at 88. So I definitely do see him get a lot of boards on the offense. So they get second chance points a lot in that regard. From a defensive perspective, his steal was downgraded to a 33, but his athleticism was upgraded. And I can say that because his strength is an 83 and his stamina is a 95. And then his potential is an 83. Now, I don't know what it was before, but just wanted to highlight what he looks like very quickly. And so from a play perspective, Frankie definitely contributes. I don't have anything negative to say per se, but I do wish I could see more from a defensive standpoint. You'll see that his perimeter defense is not good, but his block attribute is high. Couple that with his shot contest as well as his height, and I think his vertical is pretty decent. It's okay. It's a little bit under average at 62, but I think for the most part, he's definitely able to get in the way and cause some issues on the defensive standpoint. I just want to see him progress a little bit more so that some of these attributes could get higher and some of his confidence in his defensive abilities will come forth so that he could be more accretive, if that's the word I'm looking for, to the overall defense on this team, because I think that's what's lacking for the most part. And then after Frankie, let's highlight another 2K base, which is Brandon Moncrief. Now with Brandon, as I mentioned before, he was created off of a 2K base similar to Frankie Lane, but the only difference is that, in my opinion, the 2K, or I shouldn't say the 2K, but the randomizer helped him out a little bit. So surprisingly enough, he qualified for a lot of badges, as you can see. He has 14 badges. He's considered a rebounder, but his overall is a 71. And I think a lot of that overall is based on some of the attributes associated with his physicals, mainly around his height. So as you can see, he is a 7'6" monster. I believe he is the tallest in the league. And when I saw his overall, I didn't expect much. I thought he was going to be just honestly a waste of space. But then when I started having the blacktop games, pretty much Brandon was the dominant center for a long time until another player came into the game, and I'm not going to spoil that for you. I'll highlight him when his time comes. But even in the game, when I watch Brandon play, he's definitely defensive minded. And so I want to take a deeper dive into his attributes. First, I'll highlight the attributes that were changed, and then I want to take a look at his defensive attributes as well. Now, the randomizer changed his driving layup and it brought it down to a 56. I'm going to assume it was brought down. But then his offensive rebound was increased to a 96. So he does get a lot of boards in that regard on offense. His driving dunk is a 55. Defensive consistency is a 68. And pick and roll defense IQ is a 48. And then his potential is a 81. So he does have room to grow. Now, from a defensive standpoint, his defense rebound is lower than his offensive rebound, but he still can get in there considering his size, but then his interior defense is a 69. Now, it's not as great as you would want from a center, but considering his sheer size alone, he can get out of the way and stop things accordingly. Even though his attribute for blocks is 50, I definitely see him get a lot of blocks, mainly because of his wingspan and his height. His vert is a 74, so that's definitely helpful. And he's pretty fast for a tall dude. And so overall, I think Brandon's one of those sleepers that exist within the league if given room to grow. And let's just check to see what that would look like. Right now, he is 23. He won't have much room to grow. If his peak starts at 25 and it ends at 26, that's tough. So we'll probably get a solid year, but even still, he'll be able to contribute until he gets to that point, mainly because of his height, his wingspan, and those attributes. I will not say that Brandon is trash. I definitely been surprised by his play, but hopefully he progresses even more, becomes more of a dominant beast over time. Going against the grain, as I mentioned before, I'd only highlight certain players if there's something I saw that should be discussed. And so I'm going to talk about Winston Newman. So you'll see that he's a point guard, shooting guard, and his overall is a 69. He doesn't qualify for any badges. He's 6'4", 219, and he's a three-point specialist. Now, why am I highlighting Winston when I said I wasn't going to talk about anybody that is under a 70 overall? So Winston is the starting point guard for this team, going back to what I was saying before about if there's a need, 2K is going to fill that need, even if the player is a low overall compared to everybody else, which is Winston's case. Winston is based, or not even based, but he is from the fictional draft class that I had in my previous version of my league, and he went 57th overall. So he was the 4th to last pick. So I definitely didn't expect much, but I will say on offense, he's definitely helpful, and his defense could definitely use some work. And unfortunately, you could see that because if you remember the 76ers spotlight, the intro video that we had for that, he unfortunately was the one who got his ankle broken by Shannon Tarsuski. But nonetheless, from a shooting perspective, you can see that he's good from the close range, but the majority of his shots will come from beyond the arc, and he tends to hit them a lot. Now, granted, I didn't create an intro video for you to see this, but trust me on this, he definitely hits those three-pointers very well. I wouldn't say when needed, but he can hit them. So like with Austin, like with Michael, his consistency is definitely not where I would like it to be, but if given the opportunity, given the space, and I'm assuming given the right position on the court, he'll be able to hit those shots. From a free throw perspective, I rarely see him miss, even though his attribute is a 71. He's definitely helpful with his passing, even though his IQ is a 55. And as I mentioned before, from a defense perspective, don't expect much from him. From a perimeter perspective, he does try to stay in front of his matchup, but I think his lateral quickness is actually a 97. So I'm not sure why he got cracked the way he did, but hey, it is what it is. From a consistency perspective, you'll see his consistency is a 58, which reinforces what I was saying before. I do hope that he progresses over time, mainly because I think he's a sleeper. He has a lot of skills so far, given the attributes that he has right now from what I've seen. His potential is only a 72, which is tough. That means within a year or two, he'll be maxed out since his overall is a 69. And let's just take a look at his peak start and end. So his peak start is actually now, since he's 20 right now, and it ends at the age of 34. So even though his potential is a 72, it might actually be higher than the 72 by the time everything is said and done. Now, it will depend on this second fictional draft class that I'm working on. If there are people that are definitely higher and get picked up during the draft, and at the end of the season, free agency is going to be a big deal because all of the players are going to be free agents. So if he doesn't get selected by a team, it might be GG's for him, but we'll see. Hopefully a team picks him up and develops him. I think he might have the potential to go far. If not a starter, at the very least, somebody that can provide some depth to the bench if he improves his shooting. But we'll see. And that will do it. Like I said, I'm not going to go through all of the players. If something happens during the season as we play things, I'll highlight additional players. So for example, Gabe Tiggs, I believe. I don't have much to say just yet, but hopefully over the course of the season, things change. I will say that oftentimes you'll see that these folks progress very quickly since I removed the intangibles. So anything is possible in this league. But nonetheless, thank you for your time. Thank you for watching this video, and I will see you next time. Peace.